The sun was just beginning to set over the small town, casting long shadows across the streets. A young black teenager, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, walked down the sidewalk, his hands tucked into his pockets. He had a quiet confidence about him, the kind that comes from knowing who you are. At the same time, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the same street. Inside, an officer with a sharp jawline and a bored expression scanned the area. His name wasn't important, what mattered was the way he carried himself, like he owned the streets. As the cruiser neared the teenager, the officer's eyes locked onto him. Something about the kid rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe it was the way he walked, head held high, unbothered. Or maybe it was just another slow day, and the officer was looking for something, anything, to break the monotony. The cruiser pulled up beside the teenager, and the officer rolled down his window. "Hey, kid," he called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Where you headed in such a hurry?" The teenager slowed his steps but didn't stop. "Just going home," he replied calmly. The officer smirked. "Home, huh? You sure about that? This isn't the kind of neighborhood where people just walk around without a reason." The teenager finally stopped and turned to face the officer. There was no fear in his eyes, just patience. "I live here," he said simply. The officer chuckled, leaning further out the window. "Yeah? And what's your daddy do?" "Let me guess, military, right?" "That's always the story." The teenager's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his gaze. "Yeah," he said. "He is." The officer burst out laughing, slapping the steering wheel. "Oh, that's a good one. Every kid like you says the same thing. My dad's in the military. Like that's supposed to scare me or something." The teenager didn't respond. He just stood there, waiting. The officer wiped fake tears from his eyes, still grinning. "All right, kid, whatever you say. But let me give you some advice, next time, come up with a better lie. This one's getting old." With that, he rolled up his window and drove off, still chuckling to himself. The teenager watched the cruiser disappear around the corner. Then, without another word, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Hey," he said when the call connected. "Yeah, it happened again." A deep voice responded on the other end. "Same thing?" "Same thing." There was a pause. Then the voice said, "I'll handle it." The teenager slipped his phone back into his pocket and continued walking. He knew something the officer didn't. And soon, the truth would arrive. The teenager didn't live far from where the officer had stopped him. His house was a modest one, with a neatly kept lawn and an American flag hanging by the door. Inside, the walls were lined with framed photos, some of a man in uniform, some of the teenager as a child, standing proudly beside him. As he walked in, his father was in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity in his movements. He turned when he heard the door open. "You're late," he said, not unkindly. The teenager shrugged. "Got stopped." His father's hand stilled. The air in the room grew heavier. "Again?" "Yeah." For a moment, neither spoke. Then his father turned off the stove and wiped his hands on a towel. "What happened?" The teenager dropped his bag on the couch. "Same as always. Asked me where I was going. Then made jokes about you being in the military." His father's jaw tightened. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone was firm. "Which officer?" "I don't know his name." "White guy, dark hair, drives Unit 47. His father nodded slowly. He walked over to the window, staring out at the quiet street. "You okay?" The teenager shrugged again. "I'm used to it." That was the worst part, he was used to it. And his father knew it. Meanwhile, the officer was back at the station, leaning against his desk and laughing with a few of his colleagues. "You should have seen this kid's face," he said, shaking his head. "Tried the whole 'my dad's in the military' thing like it was gonna make me back off." One of the other officers smirked. "Classic. They always think that'll work." The first officer snorted. "Right? Like, what's next, his uncle's the president?" They all laughed, the sound echoing through the precinct. None of them noticed the sergeant standing in the doorway, arms crossed. When the laughter died down, the sergeant cleared his throat. "You boys having fun?" The officers straightened up. "Just joking around, Sarge," one of them said. The sergeant didn't smile. "You know who's transferring in tomorrow?" "New lieutenant." The first officer shrugged. "So?" The sergeant's expression was unreadable. "So, maybe save the jokes for after you meet him." With that, he walked away, leaving the officers exchanging confused glances. The next morning, the station was buzzing. Word had spread that the new lieutenant was someone important, a decorated veteran with years of service. Rumor had it he'd been handpicked for the job. The officer from the day before wasn't worried. He'd met plenty of lieutenants in his time. None of them had ever bothered him. But then the doors opened, and the new lieutenant walked in. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A face that looked like it had seen combat, and hadn't flinched. The officer's stomach dropped. Because standing there, in full uniform, was the man from the photos in the teenager's house. The lieutenant's eyes scanned the room, stopping when they landed on the officer. And for the first time in a long time, the officer felt something he wasn't used to. Fear. The precinct fell silent as the new lieutenant stepped forward. His boots echoed against the floor, sharp and deliberate. Every officer in the room straightened up, sensing the authority radiating off him. The cocky officer from the day before swallowed hard. His fingers twitched at his sides. He tried to keep his face neutral, but his pulse hammered in his throat. The lieutenant stopped in the center of the room. His voice was calm but carried like a command. "I'm Lieutenant Harris. Some of you know me. Some don't." His eyes flicked toward the officer. "That'll change soon." A few officers nodded respectfully. The sergeant from the night before stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. The lieutenant continued. "I don't believe in wasting time. So let's get one thing clear, this department operates with respect. For the community. For each other." He paused. "And especially for the people we're sworn to protect." The officer's palms were sweating. He forced himself to stay still, but his mind raced. Did he know? Was this about yesterday? Then, as if reading his thoughts, the lieutenant turned and locked eyes with him. A beat of silence. Then, without breaking his stare, the lieutenant said, "Dismissed." The room exhaled. Officers scattered, murmuring to each other. The lieutenant walked away, leaving the officer standing there, heart pounding. Back at home, the teenager sat at the kitchen table, picking at his breakfast. His father had left early that morning, earlier than usual. He hadn't said much, but the teenager knew. His phone buzzed. A text from a friend, "Heard your dad's the new LT crazy." The teenager smirked. "Yeah. Crazy." He didn't feel the need to say more. At the station, the officer tried to focus on his paperwork, but his mind kept replaying the lieutenant's words. That look. That tone. His partner nudged him. "You good? You've been staring at that same page for 10 minutes. The officer blinked. "Yeah. Fine." His partner frowned but didn't press. Then the intercom crackled. "Officer Reynolds, report to Lieutenant Harris's office." The blood drained from his face. His partner whistled low. "Damn. First day and you're already getting called in? Reynolds stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He wiped his hands on his pants and walked toward the lieutenant's office like a man heading to his own execution. The door was slightly ajar. He knocked. "Come in." Reynolds stepped inside. The lieutenant sat behind his desk, flipping through a file. He didn't look up. Reynolds cleared his throat. "You wanted to see me, sir?" The lieutenant turned a page. "Close the door." Reynolds did. The click of the latch sounded final. The lieutenant finally looked up. "You like mocking kids, Officer Reynolds?" Reynolds's mouth went dry. "Sir?" The lieutenant leaned back in his chair. "Let me make this simple. Yesterday. My son. Ring any bells?" Reynolds's stomach twisted. His son. The kid hadn't been lying. The lieutenant's voice stayed calm, but his eyes were ice. "I don't tolerate disrespect. Especially not toward my family. And especially not from someone who's supposed to serve the public." Reynolds opened his mouth, but no words came out. The lieutenant stood, towering over the desk. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to think very carefully about how you do your job from now on. Because if I hear one more complaint, we're going to have a problem." He walked around the desk, stopping inches from Reynolds. "And trust me, officer. You don't want that problem." Reynolds nodded quickly. "Understood, sir." The lieutenant held his gaze a moment longer. Then he stepped back. Dismissed. Reynolds practically bolted from the office. Outside, he leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His hands shook. His partner rounded the corner, eyebrows raised. "What the hell was that about?" Reynolds ran a hand over his face. "I think I just messed up. Bad." His partner waited for an explanation. Reynolds just shook his head. He had a feeling this wasn't over. The rest of Reynolds' shift passed in a blur. Every time he turned a corner, he half expected to see Lieutenant Harris watching him. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous tension that didn't go unnoticed. His partner finally pulled him aside near the locker room. "All right, man, what's really going on? You've been jumpy all day." Reynolds hesitated. He wanted to brush it off, pretend it was nothing, but the weight of the lieutenant's warning was crushing. "I might have messed with the wrong kid yesterday," he muttered. His partner's eyes widened. "Wait. The lieutenant's son?" Reynolds gave a stiff nod. His partner let out a low whistle. "You're lucky you still have a badge." That wasn't comforting. Meanwhile, the lieutenant sat at his desk, flipping through personnel files. His expression was unreadable, but his mind was working. He'd dealt with officers like Reynolds before, cocky, entitled, thinking the badge made them untouchable. But this was personal. His phone buzzed. A text from his son. "Did you talk to him?" The lieutenant typed back, "Yeah. We'll see if he's smart." He didn't mention the other thing he'd discovered. Reynolds' file was full of complaints. Minor stuff, mostly. Rudeness. Unnecessary stops. Nothing enough to get him fired, yet. But patterns mattered. And the lieutenant was very good at noticing patterns. The next day, Reynolds was assigned to foot patrol, a demotion in everything but name. No cruiser, no partner. Just him, the sidewalk, and hours to think. He told himself it was fine. He could lay low, do his time, and things would go back to normal. Then he saw him. The teenager, the lieutenant's son, leaning against a fence, watching him. There was no smirk, no taunt. Just quiet observation. Reynolds stiffened but kept walking. The kid pushed off the fence and fell into step beside him. "Patrol, huh? Guess my dad wasn't kidding." Reynolds clenched his jaw. Look, kid. It's not, kid, the teenager interrupted, voice calm but firm. It's Jay. And you don't get to talk to me like I'm some punk you pulled over anymore. Reynolds stopped walking. What do you want? Jay studied him. Just wanted to see if you got the message. Guess you did. He tilted his head. Question is, did you understand it? Reynolds didn't answer. Jay nodded, like that was answer enough. My dad's fair. But he doesn't forget. With that, he walked away, leaving Reynolds standing there, fists clenched. Back at the station, the lieutenant was in a meeting with the chief. The older man sighed, rubbing his temples. I'm not saying Reynolds is a bad officer, but he's not a good one either, the lieutenant finished. I've reviewed his file. He's skating by on bare minimums. And after what happened with my son. The chief held up a hand. I get it. But unless he screws up on duty, there's only so much we can do. The lieutenant leaned forward. What if we make sure he screws up? The chief's eyebrows shot up. The lieutenant smiled, a sharp, dangerous thing. Not like that. I mean put him where his attitude can't hide. Community outreach. School visits. Let him earn his badge back. The chief considered it. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right. But if he can't handle it? Oh, he won't, the lieutenant said, standing. And then we'll have all the reason we need. Reynolds' new assignment came through that afternoon. Officer Reynolds is hereby assigned to the Community Relations Unit, effective immediately. Duties include school safety seminars, neighborhood meetings, and public engagement initiatives. He stared at the paper in disbelief. Community relations? That was a joke. That was for rookies and washed-up cops who couldn't handle real work. His partner clapped him on the shoulder, half sympathetic, half amused. Looks like you're gonna learn some people skills, man. Reynolds crumpled the paper in his fist. This wasn't over. Reynolds' first community outreach assignment was at the local high school, the same one Jay attended. The irony wasn't lost on him. He stood in the parking lot, adjusting his uniform, already sweating under the morning sun. A group of students passed by, eyeing him with open suspicion. One kid muttered something under his breath, and the others laughed. Reynolds gritted his teeth. Stay professional. Inside, the principal greeted him with a tight smile. Officer Reynolds, welcome. We appreciate you taking the time. Like I had a choice, Reynolds thought. But he nodded. Happy to be here. The principal led him to the auditorium, where a restless crowd of students waited. As Reynolds stepped onto the stage, his eyes immediately landed on Jay, sitting near the front, arms crossed. Watching. Reynolds cleared his throat. Good morning. I'm here to talk about safety and... Burrowing, a voice called from the back. Laughter erupted. Reynolds' face burned. This was a nightmare. Then Jay stood up. The room quieted. Jay didn't look at Reynolds. He faced the other students. Y'all gonna act like kids, or you gonna listen? His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Dude's here to do his job. Least we can do is hear him out. A few kids grumbled, but the chatter died down. Reynolds was stunned. Why would Jay help him? He didn't have time to dwell on it. The principal gave him a pointed look. Go on. Reynolds stumbled through his presentation, painfully aware of Jay's gaze. Every joke fell flat. Every attempt to sound relatable just made him seem more out of touch. By the end, even the teachers looked relieved when it was over. As the students filed out, Jay lingered. Reynolds braced himself for a mocking remark, but Jay just said, "You're bad at this." No malice. Just fact. Reynolds exhaled sharply. Yeah, well, it's not exactly my thing. Jay studied him. Then what is your thing? Harassing kids on the street? Reynolds' jaw tightened. I was doing my job. Jay's expression didn't change. Funny. My dad does the same job. Doesn't act like you. Before Reynolds could respond, Jay turned and walked away. The next few weeks were brutal. Reynolds was sent to neighborhood meetings, youth centers, even a daycare, which, somehow, went worse than the high school. Everywhere he went, people either ignored him or challenged him. And every failure made its way back to the lieutenant. One evening, after a particularly disastrous shift, Reynolds sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He was exhausted. Humiliated. And for the first time, he wondered, what if I'm the problem? The thought was like a punch to the gut. His phone buzzed. A text from dispatch, report to the station. Lieutenant Harris wants to see you. Reynolds' stomach dropped. He knew what this was about. The station was quiet when Reynolds arrived, most officers already gone for the night. The lieutenant's office light was still on, casting a harsh glow through the glass. Reynolds hesitated outside the door, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants. He knocked. Come in. Lieutenant Harris sat behind his desk, paperwork spread in front of him. He didn't look up as Reynolds entered. You wanted to see me, sir? Reynolds' voice sounded too loud in the small room. The lieutenant finally lifted his head. His expression was unreadable. Sit. Reynolds sat. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. Then the lieutenant leaned back in his chair. You've been busy. Reynolds swallowed. Yes, sir. Community outreach. School visits. The lieutenant tapped a finger on the desk. How's that going for you? Reynolds' throat tightened. Was this a trick question? It's challenging, sir. The lieutenant's eyes sharpened. Challenging. He repeated the word slowly, like he was tasting it. You mean people don't like you? Reynolds flinched. The lieutenant leaned forward. Here's what I think. I think you're used to people being afraid of that badge. Used to treating folks like they're beneath you just because you can. His voice hardened. But out there? In the real world? That badge doesn't make you special. It makes you accountable. Reynolds opened his mouth, but the lieutenant cut him off. Save it. I didn't call you here to listen to excuses. He slid a file across the desk. I called you here to give you a choice. Reynolds stared at the folder. A choice? Open it. Inside were transfer papers, to a precinct across the state. Smaller town. Lower pay. Reynolds' head snapped up. You're shipping me out? The lieutenant's gaze didn't waver. I'm giving you a chance to start over. Somewhere your reputation hasn't ruined you yet. He paused. Or you can stay here. But if you do, things change. No more attitude. No more power trips. You earn back the respect you burned. Reynolds' hands shook. This wasn't fair. He'd just been doing his job. Had he, though? The memory of Jay's voice echoed in his head. My dad does the same job. Doesn't act like you. The lieutenant stood, ending the meeting. Think about it. You've got 48 hours. Reynolds drove aimlessly for hours, the lieutenant's words pounding in his skull. Accountable. Respect. Choice. He found himself outside the high school again, empty now in the moonlight. This was where it had all started unraveling. Where he'd realized how far he'd fallen. His phone buzzed. A notification from the local news app. Veteran officer saves teen from overturned car. I just did what anyone would do, says hero cop. The photo showed an older officer, one Reynolds recognized from the next precinct over, helping a dazed teenager to safety. The comments were full of praise. Real police work. This is what we need more of. Reynolds stared at the screen until it went dark. When had he last helped someone? Really helped them? He couldn't remember. The next morning, Reynolds walked into the lieutenant's office before shift even started. The lieutenant looked up, eyebrows raised. That was fast. Reynolds set the untouched transfer papers on the desk. I'm staying. For the first time, something like approval flickered in the lieutenant's eyes. And? Reynolds took a deep breath. And I've got a lot to learn. The lieutenant nodded slowly. Good answer. He stood, extending his hand. Welcome to the real job, officer. Reynolds shook it, feeling something he hadn't in years. Hope. The precinct buzzed with whispers when Reynolds walked in the next morning. Everyone had heard about his meeting with the lieutenant. Some officers smirked as he passed, others avoided his gaze entirely. His former partner just shook his head and muttered, "Should have taken the transfer, man." Reynolds ignored them all. He had work to do. His first assignment? Ride along with Officer Gutierrez, a 15-year veteran known for her community connections. She was waiting by her cruiser, arms crossed, when Reynolds approached. "Let's get one thing straight," she said before he could even greet her. "This isn't a partnership. You're here to watch and learn. Speak when spoken to. Understood?" Reynolds nodded. Understood. Gutierrez studied him for a long moment, then jerked her head toward the passenger seat. "Get in." The shift started quietly. Routine traffic stops. A noise complaint at an apartment complex. Nothing dramatic. But Reynolds noticed how Gutierrez handled each call differently, how she adjusted her tone for an elderly woman versus a group of rowdy teens. How she listened more than she talked. During a lull, Reynolds finally spoke up. "You know all these people?" Gutierrez kept her eyes on the road. "Most of them. Been working this beat a long time." "But how do they?" Reynolds hesitated. "How do they trust you like that?" Gutierrez snorted. "You serious? They trust me because I earned it. Showed up when they needed help. Treated them like people instead of suspects." She glanced at him. "Wild concept, right?" Reynolds looked away, shame burning his ears. The real test came that afternoon. Dispatch crackled over the radio, disturbance at 14th and Maple. Juvenile altercation. Gutierrez hit the lights and sirens. When they arrived, a crowd of teenagers had gathered outside a corner store. At the center, two boys shoved each other, faces flushed with anger. Reynolds tensed. This was exactly the kind of situation where he'd normally come in swinging authority. But Gutierrez didn't even unclip her pepper spray. "All right, break it up," she called, stepping between them. "What's going on?" One boy, maybe 16, with a split lip, glared past her. "He stole my brother's bike." The other kid, taller but trembling, shot back, "I didn't steal shit. It's mine." Gutierrez held up a hand. "Let's take a breath. You," she pointed to the first kid. "What makes you think it's your brother's?" The boy hesitated. It looks like his." Gutierrez turned to the second teen. "You got proof it's yours?" The kid dug in his pocket and pulled out a receipt. "Bought it last week from Mike's bike shop." Gutierrez examined it, then showed the first boy. "See? Date, serial number, everything." She lowered her voice. "I get why you were upset, but you can't go starting fights over assumptions." The boy deflated, shamefaced. "Yeah. Sorry." Just like that, the tension dissolved. The crowd dispersed. Crisis averted, without handcuffs, without arrests. Back in the cruiser, Reynolds stared at Gutierrez. That's it? You're just letting them go? Gutierrez started the engine. What did you want me to do? Ruin two kids' records because one jumped to conclusions? She shook her head. Sometimes the job's about solving problems, not just punishing people. Reynolds fell silent, turning her words over in his mind. That night, as he signed out, Lieutenant Harris appeared at his desk. Heard you had an interesting day. Reynolds straightened. Yes, sir. Learned a lot. The lieutenant's mouth quirked. Gutierrez has that effect on people. He paused. You're scheduled at the youth center tomorrow. Think you're ready? Reynolds took a deep breath. I'll do my best, sir. For the first time, he actually meant it. The youth center gymnasium buzzed with chaotic energy as Reynolds stepped inside. 30 middle schoolers ricocheted between basketball hoops and snack tables, their shouts echoing off the cinderblock walls. A harried staff member spotted his uniform and practically ran over. Officer. Thank God, the kids have been asking about the K-9 demo all week. Your partner's already setting up outside. Reynolds blinked. K-9 demo? The lieutenant hadn't mentioned this. He pushed through the double doors to the courtyard where Jay, the lieutenant's son, stood beside a panting German shepherd, adjusting its protective sleeve. He looked up, equally surprised. They sent you for this? Reynolds opened his mouth, then closed it. This had to be intentional. Some kind of final test from the lieutenant. Jay studied him for a long moment before sighing. All right, here's the deal. This is Coda. She's a trained bite dog. These kids have been through hell, foster care, rough neighborhoods, some have cops in their family trees like I do. He lowered his voice. So if you're gonna be weird or condescending, leave now. The words hit Reynolds like a gut punch. He thought of Gutierrez calming that fight without arrests. Of the lieutenant giving him a second chance. I'm here to help, he said quietly. Just tell me what to do. Jay searched his face, then nodded. The demonstration started awkwardly. Reynolds fumbled through explaining Coda's training while Jay handled the actual commands. But as the kids' wide-eyed questions came, does she bite bad guys? Can she smell drugs? Something unexpected happened. Reynolds found himself listening. Really listening. One tiny girl in braids tugged his sleeve. My brother says cops hurt dogs. The gym fell silent. Jay stiffened, but Reynolds knelt to her eye level. Some people are scared of police dogs, he admitted. But Coda here? She's like a furry superhero. Her job is to protect people, just like mine should be. Jay's eyebrows shot up. The kids murmured, some nodding. When a brave volunteer strapped on the bite sleeve, Reynolds didn't play tough guy cop like he would have months ago. Instead, he explained each step, made the kid laugh by pretending Coda was ticklish, and, when the German shepherd finally lunged, immediately reassured everyone she was just playing her favorite game. By the end, even skeptical teens were petting Coda's ears. Afterward, Jay cornered him by the water fountain. That wasn't terrible. Reynolds snorted. High praise. Jay hesitated, then said what they'd both been thinking. You're different now. Reynolds looked at his hands, the same hands that had once gestured dismissively at this very kid. Had good teachers. A beat passed. Then Jay surprised them both by offering a fist bump. Don't make me regret this. Reynolds bumped it, something tight in his chest finally loosening. Later that night, Lieutenant Harris stood in his backyard, staring at the stars. His wife joined him, handing him a beer. Jay texted me, she said. Said Reynolds did okay today. The lieutenant took a slow sip. Yeah? He said. She smirked. Tell Dad his evil plan worked. The lieutenant chuckled, but his eyes were proud. Not just for Reynolds, for his son, who'd shown more grace than most adults ever could. At the same moment, Reynolds sat on his apartment fire escape, replaying the day. His phone buzzed, a precinct alert about tomorrow's schedule. His new assignment, Community Relations Liaison. Permanent. For the first time in his career, the title didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a fresh start.